Hi, and welcome to Chapter 16. In Chapter 16, I'm going to just look at two of the objectives. I'm going to do those as the instructor in the lead PowerPoints. And then there are some really good YouTube videos that are already been produced, and I think they're much better caliber than what I can do. And it was essentially what I would tell you anyway. So do look at those. So let's go ahead and get to a monopolistic competition. And again, remember in 16 and 17, we're taking a look at those market structures which lie between a perfectly competitive market where the buyer has all the power and a monopoly where the seller has all the power. In between are monopolistic competition and oligopoly. This chapter, we're going to look at monopolistic competition. One of the interesting things is you can look at monopolistic competition and an oligopoly and kind of make a case that an organization could be in both industries. Monopolistic competition, we have a highly differentiated product. That's really what kind of signifies this particular industry, or is the main characteristic, if you will. In terms of the oligopoly, where there's a few relatively large producers, some students looking at it excuse me, from a producer standpoint down, will say that it's an oligopoly. And some students looking at it from a product line up will say that it is monopolistic competition. As long as you provide your rationale, I can kind of see both sides of that. So let's go ahead and jump at it and see what we've got here in this objective. Oh, I need to do my screen. There we go. Okay, now we're looking right. Okay, so again, we're going to take a look at what structures lie between, and then we're going to take a look at how competition plays a role in a monopolistic competitive market. So for this particular section, we're going to take a look at those structures. Why or how do they choose their price and their quantity? And if you're already thinking to yourself, I know that one, you're right. It's where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Good job. And how do they earn economic profit? Remember, that kind of encounters that whole idea of opportunity cost as well. Okay, so when we look at in between this monopoly and a perfectly competitive market, again, the two extremes that we've looked at, we're now going to, in this chapter, chapter 16, take a look at monopolistic competition, which is much more indicative of the markets that we've actually looked at throughout the semester. And then in 17, we're going to take a look at an oligopoly. So the main difference here is oligopoly, we look at the market concentration. Okay. And in monopolistic competition, we have many firms sell similar products, and we would say there's differentiation here, which means that in monopolistic competition, the companies are going to spend a lot of money on advertising so that consumers perceive that there is a difference between their product and their competitors. So you'll see a lot of head-to-head competition and so on. So here are the characteristics. So we have many sellers, and the main characteristic here is product differentiation. And that means that consumers believe that the product is different. So if you ask me, what's the difference between athletic shoes? And I would say, well, whichever one doesn't hurt my feet. But I know, excuse me, I know a lot of you are consumers of athletic shoes. And so you might say, hey, no, Nike is way better than, say, Reebok. Okay, if that's even still a brand, I don't know, or vice versa. So when we look at that, there is a lot of head-to-head competition, and individuals believe, and that's fine, because again, what they're willing to pay might be drastically higher for that particular product because they believe it's differentiated. We still have this free entry and exit, and that's kind of important when we talk about the long term and what happens in this market. So is it terribly easy to get in? Not so much, but it is easier than a monopoly and an oligopoly. So here's some examples, and you'll see that's a lot of the stuff that we've looked at throughout our entire course. So we really have kind of been looking at monopolistic competition. Okay, so just to compare and contrast, I kind of like these slides that do a nice job saying, you know, what are the differences and what are the similarities between market. So again, perfectly competitive market. What do you remember about that? You should remember in a perfectly competitive market, price equals marginal revenue, which equals average revenue. And remember, it is perfectly elastic because the product is homogeneous. So again, power here, more so in the sellers, free entry and exit. And remember, long-run economic profits were zero in a perfectly competitive market. How do they differ? In monopolistic competition, now we're going to see that price is going to be different. We are going to still produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, okay? But you'll see that the product is differentiated. Does the firm have market power? And the answer is yes, because consumers give it to them because the product is differentiated. And now we have a downward sloping. So we see some inelastic, because if you know somebody who's very brand loyal and they will accept no substitute, then that creates this inelastic portion of the demand curve, therefore it's not perfectly horizontal. Allergies are acting up. I don't have corona, you know, not that I know, but okay, let's go ahead and compare and contrast monopolistic competition to a monopoly. So again, taking a look at their differences, we have many sellers. Here there's free entry and exit. So that's important because this free entry and exit are what make the long-run economic profit zero. And does the firm have any market power? Yes, because of differentiation, downward sloping, and there are many close substitutes here as a versus none in the monopoly. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at what a monopolistic competitive market looks like and how it would earn profits in the short run. So here we have price and quantity, we have a demand curve, and here's the marginal revenue curve. Remember that marginal revenue is the slope of the total revenue curve. And in this case, it will not pass below the x-axis down here. The marginal revenue curve will not. We need a marginal cost curve and an average total cost curve to really make some determinations in this market. So the first thing I want to do is to kind of take this and kind of show you again what are the most important points to find these days. And we know that's where marginal revenue and marginal cost meet. So that's right there. We're going to follow that down. And this will be the quantity for the monopolistic competitive market where profit is maximized. At what price will they sell? So this is where you extend this up to the demand curve, over to the price, and this will be the price that the monopolistic competitive market will want to charge. Now, the first thing we ask ourselves is this firm profitable? And as long as the demand curve is above the average total cost curve, then we can easily see if we take the intersection of the average total cost with the line segment that we've made for marginal revenue, marginal cost, and follow that over, that everything within this rectangle here is going to be the profitability. So in this particular instance, yes, the firm is profitable. Now this is important because when we talk about that profitability, because we have free entry and exit in this market, remember that profitability does what? That's right, it invites competition. So again, this is one firm we're looking at in this particular graph, but we know that if we're profitable, then if we look at, again, quantity and price and what's happening in the market, here's our demand curve, Here's our supply curve, and here is our quantity in the market, and here is our price in the market. That as profitability happens, firms are going to enter into this particular market. And when they do that, that's going to shift the supply curve out for the market to S1. And I'll just say after competition. What's the effect of that? Notice that the price in the market is going to go down. Okay, so this profitability, the minute that you see these highlighted profitability here, you know that this profitability is going to invite competition, which is going to shift the supply curve out, driving the price down. Okay, think of it like dominoes. What's the first effect? What's the second effect? What's the third effect? Okay, so let me go ahead and erase the ink I've done on this slide. Okay, so just to reiterate, that's going to be the quantity that maximizes profit. We're going to follow that up to the demand curve, and that'll be the price at which this particular product is sold. Is this firm profitable? This is where we take the line segment that we just made, and we follow that over to the y-axis. So there's our average total cost, there's our price, and there's our profitability. So what's going to happen? Suppliers are going to come into this market because of free entry and exit, and the price is going to go down. But here's where I want to take a moment and say, but will those suppliers be able to carve out a niche for themselves? So think about it this way. In a perfectly competitive market, buyers were buying everything based upon price, right? They really, you know, the product was homogenous. But now we have a differentiated product. And when you have a differentiated product, will people switch to the new product? If you've done a really good job creating some brand loyalty and you're constantly marketing to your consumers, you use some relationship marketing, then you will accept no substitute. Okay. So let's go ahead back to our slides and take a look at what happens here. Okay. So once the supply curve comes, shifts outward and the price goes down, then we have a little bit different scenario. So here now, after we have had competitors come into the market, let's see if I can find my little, there we go. Whoops. Okay. After we have had competitors come into the market, now what happens is we're still going to produce where marginal revenue and marginal cost meet. So this is going to be the quantity that maximizes profit for this monopolistic competitive firm. We're going to go ahead and follow that up to the demand curve. And this will be the price that the monopolistic competitive market will set. But here's the problem. Look at this. Here is the average total cost. So now average total cost is greater than price. So now what we have, because of suppliers entering into this market, we have a loss, which means then what's the next effect? It means that because we have that effect, then going back to what we've talked about previously, here's the quantity, here's the price, here's our demand curve, here's our supply curve. Now, because there's a loss in the market, the supply curve is going to shift inward, and the effect driving the price up. But again, how large will the loss be? How large will the profitability be? And so that just kind of depends on how good we've done with our marketing strategy. Again, this does impact, but let me ask you, if we look at this graph right here, okay, and we ask ourselves, the graph, we look at this graph and we ask ourselves, well, what could you do? If you were a monopolistic competitive firm right now, and you're looking at this, and this is your loss, what could you do? Well, a lot of you are thinking, well, the average total cost curve is made up of average fixed costs, right? And average variable cost. So which cost can you change in the short run? You can only change the average variable cost. So right now, what we're seeing, and you can really put this on with the market with the coronavirus. You're actually seeing what many people laying off their average variable costs, and their variable costs include labor, right, raw materials, because they are trying to shift this average total cost curve down to minimize the loss that they have. Like I said, it's a fascinating time right now to teach this stuff. Love it. Okay, so if price is greater than, if average total cost is greater than price, then we're going to go ahead and produce and do our best to minimize losses. And I just kind of talked through that. Okay, so in the short run, it's similar to a monopoly because we have that differentiation. In the long run, though, because of barriers to entry and lack thereof, so lack of barriers, that's really what is driving economic profit in the long run to zero, because as long as there is profitability, firms will come in. Some will suffer losses. Those that suffer losses will leave the market, and we'll continue to see that. So this is the long run, and I think it makes a little bit more sense here. So again, first most important point to find these days, quantity that maximizes profit. We're going to go ahead and follow that up, and then we're going to follow it over. And here will be our marginal cost. Remember, that's the slope of the total cost curve. Here, how do we know we're in the long run? Because notice what the demand curve has done. The demand curve is touching the average total cost, but it is not at its lowest point. So price will equal average total cost in the long run. So therefore, we would say that economic profit will end up being zero at this point. Now, we do mark up the product, okay? Again, here's our marginal cost, maybe with production costs and everything else, and then we do charge a markup over that to help cover some of those fixed costs and variable costs. And again, hopefully, and not everybody has exactly the same costs. We talked about that in the perfectly competitive market. So why is it less efficient? Because sometimes there's excess capacity. Because we operate not on the lowest of the average total cost curve, we are producing less than the cost minimizing output. Okay, so that's the excess capacity argument. Markup over marginal cost. Again, in monopolistic competition, if the price is greater than marginal cost. In a perfectly competitive market, they are equal. How do we feel about monopolistic competition? We feel that because they're not producing, let me go back and explain this one a little bit more. So if we were to look at the supply demand, here would be for this firm quantity equilibrium. So it is less than the socially efficient, less than the efficient market. So one of the other issues that we see in monopolistic competition is we are not producing at quantity equilibrium. We are still producing where marginal revenue and marginal cost meet. So that's kind of what this second one says here. I mean, the first one here says that these monopolistic competitive markets do not have all the desirable welfare properties. So we are not producing at quantity equilibrium. We are producing at the quantity that is most profitable. Okay, there are two other things that happen when new firms come in to a monopolistic competitive market, they may be able to product variety externality, okay? And this is a surplus, consumer surplus from the introduction of new products, okay? And business stealing can happen also in a monopolistic competitive market when we take a look at the quantity equilibrium. So this is a loss. So we have a positive externality here and a negative externality in terms of a consumer standpoint. Okay. All right, so that is chapter 15, the two objectives that I wanted to cover. And like I said, I'm going to give you a couple of other YouTube clips that pertain to advertising and the economic effects of advertising. And we usually do a pro and con, what do you think about it kind of thing. But I look forward to seeing you in our last chapter, chapter 17, which is oligopolies. Thanks, be well, and have a great day.